Hello and welcome to Vivowire, the podcast from Workvivo by Zoom, where we explore the ideas, leadership habits, and cultural shifts shaping the world of modern work. Today, I'm so excited to be joined by Jacob Morgan from sunny LA. Very jealous. Jacob is a futurist, keynote speaker, and international best-selling author whose work has shaped how millions of leaders think about the future of work, leadership, and employee experience. He's written 6 influential books, including The Future Leader, Leading with Vulnerability, and the most recent 8 Laws of Employee Experience. So he is also the founder of Future of Work Leaders, a global community of top CHROs, and host of the popular Future Ready Leadership podcast. So, Jacob, I'm so psyched to have you with us today. Welcome to Vivowire. I'm curious, just kind of looking back over your career, was there kind of a specific moment that you can pinpoint that really fundamentally changed the way you think about work?
Yes. I suppose there are probably several moments, but one in particular was my first job after I graduated college. And I did this for months. And essentially what happened is I was stuck doing data entry and cold calling in PowerPoint presentations, which is not at all what I was sold. And then for me, a very pivotal moment came when one of the executives came out of his beautiful corner office in downtown LA. And he runs over to me and he says he has this really important project that he needs me to do. Or he didn't say project. He said, I have something really important I need you to help me with. And so at that point, I got very excited because I thought I paid my dues. I've been doing grunt work for many months. like I'm ready
All
for
those
something exciting.
months.
Yeah, exactly. And so he hands me $10 and he says, I'm late for a meeting. I need you to go to Starbucks and get me a cup of coffee. And at that point, internally, I kind of I'm not going to curse on your podcast, but I lost my marbles. Let's just leave it at that. And I'm sitting there thinking this is why I went to college for 4 years, 4 years and some change because I double majored. And this is why I graduated with honors, is to get you coffee. And so that was one of the last corporate jobs I ever had working for anybody else. And I actually quit that job shortly after, and I went to go work at a clothing store. I was making probably, I don't know, $10 to $12 an hour selling clothes at the mall in Woodland Hills. But while I was selling clothes, I was learning how to build websites. I was learning how to do search engine optimization. And I learned about the online marketing and building website world. And that was a very pivotal moment for me. So it was that cup of coffee that kind of set me off on this different career path and trajectory to work for myself. And I've been doing that for the last 16 years.
I'm curious. I want to talk more about future, kind of present state where we're at. Thinking about maybe the next 5 to 10 years, which I feel like feels like maybe light years, thinking about leaders specifically, what do you think they're really misunderstanding right now about the future of work?
Well, you kind of have these two camps of leaders, right? There's the anxiety camp, and then there is the excitement and the optimism camp. And so the optimism camp is there are a lot of people who are very excited about the impact of AI in terms of productivity, in terms of cost savings, in terms of the things that it's going to be able to unlock. And at the same time, you also have the anxiety camp where there are a lot of leaders and employees in general who are worried about job displacement and automation, what's going to happen. But the interesting thing is that both those stories can be true at the same time, depending on the time horizon that you look at. So long term, I'm an optimist. So looking forward several years, I do believe that we will get to a point where things will stabilize. I think we'll see a lot of new and interesting jobs getting created. I think we'll see more entrepreneurs. I think we'll see more businesses getting created. But between point A and point B, there's going to be a lot of disruption that's happening. And you're seeing this currently with what's happening with entry-level college graduates who are having difficulties finding jobs. And so I think there's this very interesting sort of paradox, this very interesting sort of fork in the road. And people assume that it has to be one or the other, but I think both narratives can be playing at the same time. And so for me, the challenge for a lot of leaders that I see is they're trying to figure out, how do you navigate that? How do you navigate the long-term optimism with the short-term potential pain that is going to be in the world? And I really empathize with a lot of leaders out there and people in general, because the narrative is not very clear when it comes to AI. And I wrote a very long, 6,000 word post on my Substack recently where I said, the transition is the crisis. And I looked at a deep dive when it comes to AI jobs and the future of work over the next 5 years. And I think the title there sort of sums up what I'm seeing, is that the transition period between point A and point B is the crisis that people are feeling and experiencing. It's not the actual point of getting to point B. It's the transition between those two that is causing a lot of turbulence and frustration. And to be honest, they're not sure what to do. What narrative should you be following? On the one hand, you see organizations like Block who are saying they're letting go of 40% of their workforce, 4,000 employees. And then on the other hand, you see stories coming out from Goldman Sachs saying AI is making no noticeable impact on GDP. You see companies like Walmart saying we have 1.6 million employees. We're not going to let go of anybody. We're keeping them all here. So as an executive, you're sort of like, well, wait a minute. I don't understand. Is AI making an impact or is it not? Should we be thinking about laying off employees or not? And just that sort of, being in that mix is a very, very challenging thing for leaders today.
I think that kind of transitions nicely. Are we seeing any sort of early signs from like leaders in particular or organizations overall that maybe are already starting to thrive in this transition?
Well, I mean, if you take a look at what some organizations are doing, like I mentioned Walmart, and there are a few other organizations out there that I think are kind of following suit, and they're basically telling their employees, we are going to commit to using AI, but we're going to do it in a way where we're not going to be thinking of letting go of employees. That sounds a lot better than saying, well, we overhired, we made some bad decisions, and we got to let people go. It's much more convenient to say, AI made us do it. We don't have a choice. We're so much more productive now. So I think the companies that are going to navigate this well are, and IBM, another good example, they said they're tripling down on Gen Z hiring. So I think the organizations that are really going to approach this well are going to realize that you need AI, of course, but at the same time, you also need to be making the same investments that you're making into technology that you're making into people. And that's where organizations like Walmart have come forward and decided that they are going to be making those commitments in reskilling, in upskilling, in creating internal talent marketplaces for their employees so that they can move around and look for different roles in geographies and functions. But the organizations that purely go out there and chase short term, I think what they're going to do is they're going to sacrifice long term. And what I mean by that is that if you use AI to avoid having to hire entry-level employees, and short term, that sounds great. Short term, it sounds like you're being more productive and you're saving money. But what ends up happening is 3 to 5 years down the road, you're going to look back and realize that you killed your entire talent pipeline. You don't have employees anymore to step into those mid and senior level roles because you chopped off the top of the pipeline. So there are a lot of conversations that I think executives are not having when it comes to AI, and they should be having more of those conversations.
I definitely appreciate all of that. So it just makes me think in your newest book, Eight Laws of Employee Experience, you really kind of discuss and unpack the idea that leaders shouldn't necessarily just be trend chasing, but you kind of pull in this idea of the STEEPLE methodology, right? Of how can we be a little bit more intentional with the decisions that we're making versus kind of just this herding effect, following those trends. Can you share just a little bit more of your perspective on that?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think following trends for the sake of following trends is a terrible, terrible idea. But it's easy to sort of fall into that trap. Like you see a company like Block go out there, and I believe somebody can fact check me on this. I think Jack Dorsey said that he was aiming for $2 million of revenue per employee, which is it's an astronomical goal to have. And so the challenge is that it's a publicly traded company. Obviously, they're going to be releasing their quarterly numbers. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to see more C-level executives and board conversations taking place where they're going to be following the numbers of Block and of other organizations. Klarna is another good example as well, right? They automated, what was
Making
it,
big plays like
700?
this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
700 customer service workers, and I think they ended up hiring a bunch of them back. Salesforce did the same thing also in customer service. And so with a publicly traded company where you're able to follow the numbers, so to speak, a lot of executives and a lot of board members are certainly going to be paying attention to that, as they should. But you should not just follow the trends for the sake of following them. And this is why I like what organizations like Walmart are doing, where they're coming forward and they're saying, that's great that Block let go of 40% of their workforce. We don't have any intention of doing that. We have intention of investing more into the people side of things and retraining and upskilling instead of letting them go. So if you're a leader, I think it's certainly important to pay attention to the various factors that are going on out there, but you shouldn't do things for the sake of other companies. And so you mentioned this STEEPLE framework, and I use this with many executives and many CHROs at companies around the world. And it's a simple way to look at the macro forces that are shaping the world and potentially shaping your business. And so the acronym stands for social. So S is social, T for technology, E economic, E is environment, P political, L is legal, and then E is ethical. And so these are sort of the macro forces. Underneath each one of those forces, there are various potential trends that might emerge. And the trends that might be relevant for you are not the same as the trends that might be relevant for a different company. But for example, if you look under like an economic force, some of the trends there might be skill-based pay models that might be emerging, the rise of portfolio careers, where maybe an employee works for multiple organizations at the same time. And so you can go through these various trends underneath each one of these forces and try to understand which trends are relevant for you. Because just because something is a trend doesn't mean it has to be your truth. And so I think it's really important for executives to pay attention to what matters for you, not what is happening in the world. And after you go through this framework and you identify the trends, it's also useful to kind of ask yourself a series of 3 questions. Should you adapt to whatever that trend is? Should you pause or should you push back? And adapt means that, yes, this is a real trend. It's aligned with our values. It's aligned with the direction of the business. We should do something as a result of this. Pause is, okay, this is a trend that's emerging. We're not quite sure yet exactly the impact it's going to have or that we should be making the investment, but we're going to be following it just to see what happens, and we'll be ready if we need to. And then push back is where you say, I get that that's a great trend for Block or for company XYZ, not relevant for us. We're going to push back on that trend. It's not something that we need to be focusing or paying attention to right now. And executives who go through that exercise, I think, will get a lot more clarity on the things that they should be paying attention to versus some of the things that they can maybe, push off and not have to focus on.
Yeah, I think I really appreciate that, and certainly have been in moments in my career where we followed this, maybe not necessarily knowing that we were following the steeple framework, but really, I think there's something to be said about just also pausing in general to be really intentional and mindful and planful about these decisions that you're making that are going to affect a lot of people. Um, Thinking more on the employee experience piece. So in this 8 laws of employee experience, can you just talk us through? I won't make you go through. You already did a really nice job of outlining Steeple for us, and I don't want to, no spoiler alerts. Everyone should pick up a copy, but can you walk us through a couple of sort of key points of these laws and really why they matter right now?
Sure. So law number 1 is the idea of decode the human signal, which really means understand your people, both from a technology side and a human side. Technology side, surveys, analytics, etc., and then there's the human side. Now, I should point out that for each one of these laws, I try to look out the next 5 to 10 years to see how things like AI and technology are going to play an impact on that. Law number 2 is act with empathetic excellence. And to your point about DEI, this is one of the reasons why I came up with this particular law. Act with empathetic excellence really means that there are 3 things that you should be focusing on: competence, merit is another one in there, and empathy. And so together, competence, merit, and empathy create this idea of empathetic excellence, which again, we can unpack later if you want. The third law from all of that is grow or go, which makes the argument that the new form of job security is learning and growth. So if you can give employees the opportunity to learn and grow and do things within the organization, then they will want to stay at the company and they won't want to leave. The next law is design for flexibility. And design for flexibility basically means that if you create an organization where employees have flexibility, that's going to be a competitive advantage. And flexibility, not just in terms of where employees work, but flexibility in terms of how employees can shape their career path inside the organization. So kind of like having knobs and dials that you can adjust career preferences is how I think about that. So law number 4 is design for flexibility. And design for flexibility is basically this idea that employees can almost control their work preferences almost like knobs on a dial. I'm not saying employees should have complete control over everything, but being able to adjust your preferences is, I think, something that we'll start to see over the next 3 to 5 years. And so flexibility is not just where you work, it is shaping more around how you work. Law number 5 is make people the first principle. So there are a lot of organizations who talk about putting people first, but how do you actually do it? So that's what law number 5 is. Law number 6 is lead like the experience starts with you. And this is a call for all the leaders out there who assume that employee experience is always an HR thing. This is a call for all of you to say that it's not an HR thing, it's also a leadership thing. Law number 7 is use technology to amplify humanity. And then the last law is run culture like an operating system, which basically means the same way that you have software on your phone that goes through upgrades and updates, you have to think of your culture as being run in the same way. So that's from a very high level what the 8 laws are, but I'm happy to go in detail in any one of them if you want.
I would be curious to flip it back over to you of what you're seeing in terms of, I know you're obviously working with a lot of C-level folks, CHROs in your groups, doing lots of research. Of these 8 laws, where are people struggling the most?
Oh, all of them. I mean, the whole reason why I wrote the book is because I thought organizations had really lost their way during and post pandemic, and they forgot about what work is about. And so the whole point of these 8 laws is to say that it's time to get back to basics, and that's what these 8 things are. And if you think about what happened during the post pandemic, during and post pandemic, organizations became too inclusive. And what I mean when I say too inclusive is that they were hiring anyone they could for any reason, regardless if there was alignment with values or culture or expectations or anything like that. And that's not really what a company is supposed to be, and that's not how you form culture. So typically when you hire, you want to hire people who are aligned with you. You want people who have a very specific set of values and skill sets who can contribute the most to your company. But because we were so scared of losing talent, we were so scared of trying to find talent, that all went out the window. And so we tried to be, collectively, these organizations tried to be anything and everything to anybody. And so as a result, they ended up becoming nothing to everyone. It was also the balance of power shifted considerably. And so during and post pandemic, I would say around 70 to 80% of the balance of power shifted into the hands of employees. And now organizations are taking it back, which I think is a good thing. I don't think employees should have 70 to 80% of the power. I think companies should, and employees should have 20 to 30%. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't listen to feedback from your employees, but as a leader who's running a company, you are in no obligation to do what your employees tell you to do. You're the leader. You make the decisions. You get feedback, of course. And if you don't implement feedback, you should explain why. But the idea that it should be somehow split 50-50 on equal footing between the company and the employee, to me, makes absolutely no sense. You can't blame the employees either because they took advantage of the situation, and a lot of them ended up profiting quite a bit, and a lot of them ended up getting in roles where they were being paid a lot more money. So I'm not saying that what employees did, I mean, if you look at it from purely a strategic business decision, for many of them, it was the right negotiating tactic and the correct business decision because they were able to take advantage of a situation that allowed them to progress, whether economically or whether in a role or whether in a company, whatever it is, it allowed them to move forward. But they need to remember, and we all need to remember, that that situation no longer exists. Because today what's happening is that if employees start to try to use those same negotiating tactics, companies are going to say, you know what, that's fine because I have a bot over here that I can use to replace you and do a lot of the work that you used to do. And so that negotiating tactic is no longer there. And so it's a very different world of work that we're all a part of. And when I interviewed over 100 chief human resource officers for my book, I asked them this very same question around entitlement and what they saw. And I heard from a lot of these chief human resource officers that yes, this is what was starting to creep into their organizations inadvertently, right? They created these environments. And when I asked these executives, can I use your story in the book? Can I use your name in the book? Can I use your company name in the book? They all came forward and they said no. And I said, how come? And they said, well, we don't want to be viewed as being anti-employee. And so what that taught me is that the entitlement culture is real, but nobody really wants to talk about it because nobody wants to acknowledge that it's there. Nobody wants to be stigmatized. Nobody wants to be viewed as anti-employee. And the reality is that we should be able to talk about these things because companies, all of you listening, you created this. You invested so heavily in these programs. You over-indexed in things like empathy and psychological safety and free food and microaggressions and this and that you created this kind of an environment.
I want to make sure we have a little bit of time to cover a few more questions on AI. And listening to your podcast, I know recently you shared some pretty interesting and I would say ironic, I'm pretty sure you said damning research about how C-suite folks, although we see many organizations incorporating AI into their strategies, turns out they're not using it themselves, which I feel like personally, maybe I wasn't that surprised by, but I'm curious, was it surprising for you? And how do you see that evolving in the coming years?
No, not surprising at all. And I think the research that you're referring to came from Nicholas Bloom from Stanford, who I've had on my podcast several times. It was a National Bureau of Economic Research working paper that they put out there. And while they found that a lot of employees that are using AI, executives at the C-suite are not. And I'm not surprised by that because if you think about what an executive does versus what a more typical worker does, it's not the same. A more typical worker has a lot of task-based work that they do. So they're writing content, they're working on presentations, they're preparing for meetings. They actually have more of the tactical side where AI can be useful to them. But if you look at something that a C-suite level does, a C-suite executive leader does, there's not a lot of the tactical stuff in there. It's much more strategic. It's much more meeting with a lot of customers, meeting with the C-suite, meeting with the board. And so you could potentially use AI there to help prepare for some of those things, but it's much more of a human and a much more relationship-based side of business as opposed to the tactical side. So I'm not surprised by that, but the irony then becomes if you are an executive who's making AI-based decisions on behalf of your workforce when you yourself are not using these tools, you start to see a little bit of a mismatch there, right? It's like, how can you prescribe and make multi-million-dollar investments in something when you yourself are not using it and are therefore potentially not as familiar with how these tools can work and what the potential negatives are, because there are plenty of negatives that also don't get talked about. So not surprised by those stats, but it does show a little bit of irony that they're not using it yet making the investments for everybody else to use. You also hear a lot of stories that get published in various publications where employees say that their executives are pushing AI when even the executives don't know why. And so it's sort of like I don't know if you remember the SNL skit with Will Ferrell, More Cowbell, and it's just more cowbell,
Of
more
course.
yeah,
It's a favorite.
exactly. So a lot of people sort of feel like that with AI, where their leaders just come forward and they say more AI, and then employees are like, wait, what? For like how? For what's happening with this? What's the goal of it? No, just stop asking questions. Use more AI. And you see some organizations come forward. Meta, I think, was one. Accenture, I believe, was another, where they said that part of your performance reviews and compensation is going to be tied to your use of AI. And again, some companies are making it mandatory like that. Some are making it more compelling. One of the challenges of making it mandatory is that you're potentially going to force employees to run all of their decisions and thinking through AI, even though it doesn't need to be. So for example, let's say you're just responding back to an email, but at the same time, you want to show your leaders, hey, look, I'm using AI. So I should get compensated more. Now what's going to happen, you're going to filter all your emails through AI, all your communication through AI. You're going to work on a PowerPoint and say, it's a pretty good PowerPoint, but I'm just going to put it into AI anyway. And so essentially what's going to happen is you will inadvertently outsource your critical thinking to AI. You will inadvertently create a performative AI use-based culture. And I also don't think that is a particularly right approach to be using. So it remains to be seen.
I think it'll be interesting to see almost like the opposite effect where you see like this was built using generative AI or what have you. Almost the reverse where it's like this was made by a human and calling that out. It's like, really if people are becoming overly dependent in some way already, or maybe that's the direction that we're headed, what's going to set people apart is rejecting it, or not necessarily in all areas, but something that sets them apart.
Well, not only that, but one of the skills that leaders don't have that they're going to need to learn how to possess is how do you pull out the human from the AI? So let's say you work in an organization with 10,000 employees, you're leading a team, I don't know, let's say 50 people. You know that everyone on your team is using AI tools. And you know that it's being done for all the work that they're doing. And so now let's say you have an employee who's delivering a project to you. Maybe it's a client report or a presentation. As a leader, you're going to need to learn how to push back on your employees and ask them questions that pull out their human judgment and discernment. So for example, you start off very high level. Hey, Barbara, did you use AI for this? And you might say, yeah, I did. Okay, how did you use it? What prompts did you put in to be able to get this kind of a response? And you'll share the prompts, and I'll say, did you think that AI missed anything? Did you have to go back and forth with it at all on any topics or conversations? What extra elements do you think you can bring to the conversation that maybe AI missed? Do you think it did a pretty comprehensive job of this? If you had to disagree with AI in any of these points, where would you disagree with it? And so you're going to need to learn how to pull out human judgment and insights and discernment from human beings. Otherwise, you're going to see a lot of copying and pasting.
So, Jacob, we have come to a point in our show where we do a little bit of culture myth busting. So, I'm going to throw out a few common workplace statements, myths, sort of cliches at you. And I want you to tell me whether or not you agree and why. Okay?
My
Sound good?
goodness. All right.
Perks and benefits create loyalty.
No.
Just a hard no.
I mean, I can unpack that too, right? I mean, perks and benefits, I kind of view them as separate because benefits can be things like healthcare. And so in certain situations and circumstances, kind of the healthcare angle might help. Perks, certainly no. But I think above all else, what creates loyalty is the work that employees are doing. It's who they're working for, the company they're a part of, the culture. That's number one. Everything else is far secondary. I mean, compensation is above perks and benefits.
AI will replace humans or the work of humans.
So that's very broad. I think it will replace a lot of tasks that humans do, but it will not replace the full job of all humans. And so I think that's a big difference. It also depends on the time horizon that you're looking at, whether you're looking at 1, 2, 3 years, or if you're looking at 15 to 20 years. So long term, I'm an optimist, but short term, there will be disruption.
All right. This one might sound familiar to you. Employee experience is about making people happy.
Definitely false. I hate
We got you
hate
there.
when everybody I hate when everybody talks about we need to make our employees happy. One of the big challenges and frustrations I have with a lot of companies is, why is it always the company's responsibility to do everything for you? Why you as an employee, where's your responsibility over your happiness, over your engagement, over your experience, over your financial wellness, over your physical well-being? Why is it always the company's responsibility to do that for you? Where are you in this equation? And companies are just scared. Honestly, we need more courageous and bold leaders to step up. And I'm not saying don't give employees resources, but you need to have honest conversations and tell your people that you're an adult. It's your life. You want something, take some accountability and responsibility over it. Don't assume the company's going to do everything for you. It's like people say, I want purpose and meaning. Okay, what do you want me to do about that? Like, is it my responsibility as the company to just hand you purpose and meaning? What's happening outside of work where you are not able to kind of get things from the rest of your life? And so I hate the whole happiness thing and assuming it's the company's job to do it.
So I know we're getting close to wrapping up. We always like to give our listeners kind of a tangible takeaway. And I think, I've certainly taken loads of notes on our conversation. But if listeners could kind of borrow maybe a particular ritual or habit to get them to kind of future ready their workplace starting today, tomorrow, what would they be? Maybe like one or two rituals or habits.
Oh, to future ready your workplace. My goodness. Well, I guess there's maybe one
It's a
kind
big,
of
it's a big
just
question.
it is, yeah. I suppose there's one maybe just kind of human one that I would do. I do this with my kids. We do this every day at dinner. We just talk about highs and lows. It's something basic, but I think being able to talk about highs and lows or wins and failures is certainly good. It gives you more insight. It's part of law number one, where kind of know your people on a human level. So it helps you understand what your employees are going through, challenges that they might have, successes that they've come across. I think that's a very important one. And I think if we're specifically talking about the future ready piece, I would say having more conversations with your employees about AI and just starting basic, like, did you use AI today? How did you use it? And what outcome did you have? And try to practice pulling the human out of the AI. So ask your employees, are they using AI? If so, how? And then follow up with a human question to pull out an insight from there. What do you think you got wrong and why? What would you improve on in the AI's answer that it didn't do a good job of highlighting? And having more of those conversations on a regular basis with employees who are using AI, I think will create more of that human plus AI culture.
So we're wrapping up our time. I have one question I always ask our guests, and for you, this is definitely your wheelhouse and your area of expertise. But what most gives you hope about the future of work right now?
What most gives me hope. I see a lot of curiosity from people, which I think gives me a lot of hope. So curious people, I see how curious my kids are. I see how curious people are when they're using different tools and technologies out there. I see organizations making investments in the human side of work. And so Team Human gives me a lot of hope.
It's now our time for a little bit of a shameless plug. I always like to give folks an opportunity to promote what they're working on.
Sure, I can give a couple links. So the book URL is the number 8exlaws.com. That's 8exlaws.com. My Substack, where I highlight some of these deep dives in my latest thinking, is futureofworknewsletter.com. And then for the CHRO group, if any CHROs are listening and they're curious to learn more, it is futureofworkleaders.com. And then my email, if people are interested in reaching out or disagreeing or challenging anything that I've said, it's jacob@thefutureorganization.com.
So thank you so much for joining us today, Jacob, for sharing your expertise, helping us to think a little bit bigger and more boldly about the future of work, dare I say. And to everybody listening, if something sparked for you today, definitely share it with others. Keep that conversation going. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Barbara Boris. This is Vivowire. We'll see you next time.